This episode of the Sam Oldham podcast is sponsored by Turn, the only brand dedicated solely to men's gymnastics. Towards the end of my career, I started to work closely with the team at Turn to design custom uniforms that expressed who I was and where I came from, and they were always able to bring my ideas to life. For years, I wore uncomfortable gymnastics clothing until I started to wear Turn, whose uniforms are built with their attention to detail and quality in mind. Go check them out now at turn-gymnastics.com and enjoy the episode. In the summer of 2024, the biggest event in the sport of gymnastics will take place. The Paris 2024 Olympic Games is the culmination of 4 years of hard work and sacrifices by the athletes and their coaching teams. The competitive season is well underway, and this month, the final individual spots for the Olympic Games will be up for grabs at the World Cup in Doha. Both the English and British championships have now taken place, and the American team is looking incredibly strong, both nationally and on the international scene. It's been a busy start to the gymnastics calendar, and this is my story. So, back probably like the day before Ozzy was born, I had a voice note and a message from Rhys McClenaghan from Ireland, pommel horse world champion. He listens to the podcast, a big fan of the show, and he asked me if I could look at maybe doing an episode on the World Cup circuit. He'd really enjoyed the men's GB team prediction episode. In fact, everybody that kind of listens to the show regularly really enjoyed that one. It did really well. We got a lot of views, a lot of engagement with it. So it's something I'm going to look to do a little bit more of in the future. We had a few messages about potentially doing an American team episode, which I will look to do later in the year. The American team seem to normally select their Olympic team closer to the games, particularly in this Olympic year. The GB team is going to be selected a lot earlier, so we'll look to do that in the future. But we're going to focus on the World Cup circuit first, and the first thing I'm going to do is play the voice note from Rhys. He's given us his permission to do that, and we're just going to take a little listen.
Hey Sam, love the video on the Olympic team prediction for GB. It's going to be an exciting one, and hopefully we can even get to watch the trials in some capacity. That'll be juicy. But I also wanted to hear your thoughts on, just before the World Cup series kicks off, who do you think on each apparatus will take those 2 spots for the Olympic Games? Because the 2 people that take those spots on each apparatus are essentially Olympic medal hopes. And I think it almost gives meaning to those World Cup series finally, and broadening the horizon of gymnastics competitions. And yeah, I'm super excited to actually spectate the first 2 World Cups and then be a part of the next 2 this year. But it's going to be such an exciting one. And yeah, I'd love to hear your views and predictions on who do you think will take the top 2 spots from each apparatus on the World Cup series. Take care, man.
So yeah, first of all, thank you to Rhys. He's literally handed me a podcast on a plate there, and it actually gave me a real good excuse to watch some gymnastics again. You know, I'm up late in the night sometimes with Ozzy, feeding him, and so I whack YouTube on and I watch some gymnastics and I try and catch up on the World Cup circuit. And I have to say, I've been somewhat out of the loop, and I was incredibly impressed with the quality of the routines of the guys that are there within the top 3 spots, 4, 5, even 6 spots. I mean, a lot of those guys are from nations that didn't qualify a team. It makes sense, right? The guys that are on those teams in the top 12 teams, they're probably not going to be sending people to those World Cup circuits because they don't need extra individual spots. If they are sending anybody, it's basically for competition experience and to test out maybe some of their athletes' performance, see where they're at, or using young guys that are coming through to give them an opportunity. But yeah, I've been incredibly impressed with what I've seen. That World Cup circuit, so on each apparatus, the 6 apparatus in men's gymnastics, there's going to be 2 spots. So there's 2 up for grabs, which is really cool. I think in the past, in the last Olympic cycle, it was just 1 spot. So I like the fact that it's 2. It gives more people an opportunity. And there's 4 competitions. So the first one was in Cairo in Egypt. The second one was Baku, Azerbaijan. Third one was Cottbus in Germany. And the final one, which is taking place in April, is in Doha. So it's just fell perfectly, because that Friday when Rhys messaged me, Connie went into labour the next day. Ozzy was born on the Sunday, and I just didn't have any time to prep because initially we were thinking about maybe doing it ahead of the third competition that was in Cottbus, which was going to be the first one where Reece would compete himself. And he says as a spectator, because he's already qualified himself a spot being the world champion. But as it happens, that last World Cup, there was a big break in between. So this episode will come out ahead of the World Cup. So you'll be able to listen to my predictions and see what I think. But yeah, it's given me a great opportunity to go through and watch some of those routines. And like I said, been super impressed. On floor, pommel horse, and high bar, there's one spot that's already been granted. So 3 of those guys have got enough points. They've already taken that first position for Olympic qualification. So on the floor, it was the Korean gymnast. Has a very good routine, incredibly consistent, he's almost taken #1 spot on all 3 of those events. Similar on pommel, he's done incredibly well. The guy that's taken the #1 spot there, it was Ahmad, and he was doing an incredibly good routine. There's a lot of pommel guys now that have that kind of long, slender, tall build that are doing such clean routines because they don't skew their hands and they're doing travels all the way over the handles. I'm expecting the judges to tweak the rules in the next cycle to stop gymnasts doing so many of those travels, just to differentiate a little bit between the top guys and bring a bit more variety back into the pommel horse routines. You know, last cycle at the Olympic Games, we were seeing loads of flare work. That's gone away now because it's kind of been downgraded. You're only allowed to do 2 elements in a flare position. So people have gone, it seems like, it's almost a bit like a capitalist society in gymnastics, in sport. Everybody does the easiest possible routine to get the highest possible score and give them the best chance of winning a medal. So, you know, at the start of an Olympic cycle, you might see some different routines because people are trying out some different kind of strategies. But by the time you get to that Olympic Games, most of the top guys are doing very similar routines, and it's more the execution that sets them apart. So he's earned that spot on pommel. And then on the high bar, from Taiwan, it's Tang, and he does a really cool high bar routine. He does that Markelov with an extra full twist, which it just really sets him apart. There's nobody else in the world that's really doing that skill. He's so tall as well on high bar, and he gets so high. He's added in a lot of other skills. He's doing Kachevs and Kovach's. You know, he was kind of very one-dimensional in the last code. He's now doing a range of skills, so he's taking that #1 spot on high bar. I'm going to go to my notes today. Like I said, I'm not the most well-versed in that World Cup circuit. I've been doing my research in between work, looking after Aussie, so I've done my best. A lot of the names are very difficult to pronounce, so I'm going to refer to my notes. But on floor, to start off with, Yahor is in the second spot with 50 points. I think floor is very tight. So he has 50 points going into the last World Cup. We've got Osberger, the French gymnast, is on 48 points, and Penev is on 45 points. So they're really tight. And if you win that #1 spot, you get 30 points, then 25, then 20, and then it goes down considerably after that. So it's going to be really tight on floor. And when I look at the routines, I think my preference is probably Yahor. His routine, you guys might be able to tell me. When I'm looking at the abbreviation for his country, it says AIN. Now, I know that he competes for Belarus. I'm not sure what that is. I'm sure it's got something to do with Belarus and their close ties with Russia. But someone listening to the podcast will be able to confirm that for me. But I really like his routine. He reminds me a little bit of the Spanish gymnast Gervasio de Fer, who was around in the early 2000s and won Olympic medals and world medals on floor and vault. Similar build, stocky, super strong, massive calves, quads, and he's got a well-rounded routine. So he's doing double straight now instead of his triple back. Probably more consistent, I think. Maybe 1/10 difference in start value. Big combinations, full double pike, double twist, double front, sticking a lot of those landings. Maybe aesthetically, his links and his moves into the corners aren't quite as nice as some of the other gymnasts, but I really like his routine. It's very well-rounded, and I have to say the quality on floor is just ridiculous. It's through the roof. I mean, some of these guys are doing. I think I potentially counted Harry Hepworth doing 8 tumbles in one of his routines. So they are just They're literally sprinting. It's like doing a 400 meters event and a gymnastics event all at the same time. So it's amazing what some of these floor guys are doing. And like I said, the routines now, I like what the judges have done in encouraging double somersaults, because you're getting really well-rounded floor routines. you've not just got gymnasts that are really good at twisting and they just maximise that skill. You've got gymnasts that are doing double somersaults and twisting, both forwards and backwards. I really like that. I like the way they've gone with the code in this cycle. That's only going to continue. I think you're going to start seeing, you're seeing a lot less gymnasts focus on just doing a round-off technique into their twisting and double somersaults, because if you look at tumblers, and the sport of tumbling is separate to the Olympic movement, but it's part of the Federation of Gymnastics, and they go down that long track and they do tumbling. There's a reason why they all do whips and flicks into their tumbles. They're the best tumblers in the world, right? They do much more difficult tumbles than we do in men's artistic gymnastics, and there's a reason they're using that flick and that whip to generate power. So I think you're going to see gymnasts moving back to doing flick into double somersaults, because they can maximize those triple backs, maybe triple backs with twists in the next cycle, double somersaults with twists. So yeah, that's been interesting from a technique side of it. I really like the French gymnast. Didn't know much about him until watching this World Cup circuit. He's got incredibly good lines, very solid, looks very consistent. Amazing that he's great on pommel horse and floor. I know you've had the likes of Max that's gone on to win 2 Olympic gold medals on floor and pommel, but it's quite a rare combination of events. You normally have pommel horse and parallel bars, and floor normally goes more with rings and vault. So that's been quite cool to see. I think he's probably got a bright future ahead of him. So yeah, been really cool to see him on floor. I think he's got his best chance is on floor, although he is in contention on pommel. But yeah, definitely one for the future. And I think he's one where the French team, they are going for a spot from him for sure, and I'm sure he is personally, but it's a great opportunity for him to compete against some of the best and gain some real valuable experience. The next guy is Penev from Bulgaria, previously competing for USA, so he changed nationalities again, although originally he was Bulgarian. He's doing pretty well, not far behind, so that floor is really up for grabs, and it depends, I guess, the person that is going into that final competition in the lead, they have the upper hand, and it's going to be the difference between the two and what place they come, because the difference between first, second and third is, say, 5 points. So there, the French guy is 2 points behind the Belarusian or whatever nationality they are. He is representing at the minute. It might be like they did at the Olympics before, the Russian Olympic Federation. They competed as like individuals. It might be that. I'm not sure, but someone can tell me. He's only 2 points behind the French gymnast. So he finishes first and the Yahor finishes second. He's going to beat him. So that's very tight on floor. Bit different on pommel. So you've got Kurbanov. He is well out in front of the next two. Again, you've got the French gymnast who's sitting there in second. It's still possible. Watching his routine, Kurbanov, it is an incredible routine. He took the gold in the last World Cup at Cottbus. I can't see anybody really beating him. He looks very consistent with that routine. You know, when he goes up there, you don't get any sense that he's really nervous. I think he's very confident, and in his own head, he's going through that routine. Pommels is an interesting one because the psychology of pommels I find really interesting. You know, I really read somebody's body language when they walk up there to put their hand up. For him, he's just cool and collective. You know, he's almost got ice in his veins. I think that routine for him is very solid. Like I said, there isn't too much risk in it. He's doing a lot of those long travels, although he has got the combination of the one-handle stuff as well. Sometimes that can be a bit risky for people, especially when they're doing a Russian on one handle. That's a high-risk element, but he looks very solid. So I'd imagine, for me, my prediction is that he's going to take that second spot. And then the 1 and 2 spots there with Ahmad, who's taken the first spot, very similar routines. So that seems like it is the path to success, the route to success there on pommel horse that a lot of people are kind of taking up this cycle. So yeah, that's pommels. The French guy, again, super impressed. I think he's been improving probably each World Cup on pommels. Looks quite consistent. I really like his lines. They're beautiful. He loses very little in execution deductions, and his shape reminded me very much of Cyril Thomasson. So it'll be interesting to see whether they potentially have the same coach or train at the same gym, because I often find that when you have a gymnast that's very successful previously in the previous generation and you have a young kid that comes up, naturally they're watching the way they perform their gymnastics, and you often notice some very similarities in the subtleties of the way that they move, even the way that they move their hands or their footwork, the way they step into the corner on floor, or the way they approach a skill is very similar if they've grown up watching a gymnast in their own gym, because that's what they've been, I guess, exposed to. So yeah, I'd be interested to know that, because they have a very similar shape on pommel, super straight. So I'm expecting big things for him. I'd like to know, if anybody's listening, what he's like on the other apparatus, because super strong on floor, pommel, I'm imagining they're two very technical apparatus. I'd like to know on parallel bars and high bar what he's like, because he might have a big future in the all-around. That's great to see from France, because they struggled as a team in recent years. They were a powerhouse for a long time, but really been struggling. So it's going to be nice if they're bringing through some strong, solid youngsters. I'd like to see that. And hopefully we'll be able to see that at the Junior Europeans next month, and whether they're challenging at the Junior Europeans for medals, hopefully that will translate to senior success. And I'm sure they'll use the backdrop of the Paris Olympic Games as a bit of a springboard. We go to rings. Rings is just, what a cool story. Like, I saw a TV advert of Samir Ait Saeed last year. I think it was for Renault. It was probably Renault. And he was doing very basic gymnastics on floor. So he did like a round-off flick straight back. And I was like walking through the house, and I was like, that's Samir. What's he still doing gymnastics? And I thought, oh, maybe like he's still in shape. They've called him up because he's quite a big name in France, and he's just done the advert. But when I saw that he was smashing the World Cup circuit on rings, I was like, wow, I mean, this guy is at least 2 years, if not 3 or 4 years older than me. So mid-30s now. Everyone will remember the Rio 2016 Olympic Games, that horrific injury, maybe the worst injury I've ever seen in gymnastics. He's done his vault and he's completely snapped his leg in half, and you saw his leg bend live on TV. It was awful. So for him to have come back and to now be going for another Olympic Games in 2024, and he's got a real shot on rings. I watched his routine. It's very consistent. He's incredibly strong. Maybe some of the cleanest ring strength elements at the start of a routine. The start of the routine for the rings guys is their biggest elements, right? You'll often see the rings guys shifting their wrists like this, trying to get the best grip they possibly can. And the better the grip you can get from the start, the longer that grip lasts. Essentially, when you're doing a rings routine, you lose your grip throughout the routine as you do more and more elements. So you'll see the gymnasts, they get lifted up by their coach and they're shifting their wrists over so far like this. But those first few elements are absolutely perfect, super smooth in his body shape. He's holding them for the 2 seconds. Often in a rings final, it comes down to the timing. If you're just a fraction below 2 seconds, and at some competitions, the judges have technology connected to the rings frame. So that's all done by technology, which is pretty cool. So they will time the vibrations of the straps or the wires on the rings, and they'll measure when you've stopped and held that rings position. If you're 1.99 seconds, you're losing big deductions. So rings comes down to, a lot of the time, who can hold it for exact 2 seconds. And it's important to note, like, when you are competing and you've got adrenaline and you're nervous, time speeds up massively. So in your head, you think you're holding the ring strength position for 2 seconds, but in fact, you might only be holding it for 1.5 seconds. That's why a lot of the time these rings guys, when in training, they're trying to hold the position for 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds, just to make sure that in the competition, when they're nervous and the adrenaline's pumping through their veins, they are holding it for long enough, because they get absolutely smashed by the judges if they don't hold for long enough. And the strength hold position starts when they stop. So if they're moving, it's not started yet. So that's something for you to watch out for when you're watching the Olympics this summer. He's on 73 points. You've got Simonov, who's on 64 points. Used to compete for Russia, has now moved over. He's competing for Azerbaijan. He's very good on rings as well, incredibly strong. Very similar to Samir. I can't see anybody taking the spot off those two. Rings is probably apparatus that is the most consistent. You can't fall off the rings, right? Unless something drastic happens and you slip, your handguards snap, or maybe you fall on your dismount. So you tend to see those guys always go through their routine. So unless something crazy happens in that last World Cup, I think it's going to be Samir taking that #1 spot, Simonov taking the #2 spot. And in the next few gymnasts, they're not far behind. You've got Jong from North Korea. We've not seen North Korean gymnasts for a long time. And he's done pretty well. He's won the first World Cup, but has been a bit hit and miss on the last two. So my prediction is that Samir and Simonov are going to take those 2 spots. And I think it's important to point out that the top 2 guys on all of these apparatus, they're going to be Olympic medal contenders, just like Reece said in the voice note. Like, it's really interesting when you think about the strongest teams that compete at the Olympic Games. So right now, let's say Japan, China, America and Great Britain, sometimes the hardest part is getting on the team. The trials and the depth and the pressure you're under just to get onto the team, by the time you get to the Olympic Games, it's almost like you can take the pressure off a little bit in terms of the performance because you made it now. It was so hard just to get here. Now you can kind of enjoy the experience. Like, this is it. Your dream's coming true. So I think for these guys, the quality and the standard has been so high and there's so much pressure on them over those 4 competitions to do well, plus all the travel, different time zones, that actually, once they get to the Olympic Games, it's going to feel, I think the pressure will be off a bit and they're kind of going out there and, yeah, they've not really got anything to lose. They've got something to gain. So I think you're going to see a lot of these guys in the Olympic apparatus finals, which is great for that World Cup because in recent years, the quality has really, the quality has gone downhill because the emphasis hasn't really been on those World Cups, but they've really switched it, especially with those two spots. I think that makes a big difference. That's much more of a motivator for somebody from one of these countries that potentially has an outside chance. That number 1 spot is hard to get, but that second spot, a lot can happen, right? Like, banking on one gymnast who's maybe one of the best specialists in the world to make mistakes is hard, but 2, okay, a lot can happen in gymnastics. You can fall like that, someone could get injured, so there's a real chance there. So it's going to be exciting to see a lot of those guys competing for medals at the Olympic Games. When we go to vault, I think vault is quite wide open still. It's pretty wide open. Those top 2 guys, I feel like they're, and when I say it's open, I think the number 1 spot is up for grabs. You've got Alafdi on 62 points, and you have Sheck from Hong Kong on 60 points, so they're super tight. So anybody could take that title. Whoever gets the highest score out of those 2, depending on the difference, is going to take the gold medal there and take that first spot. I think their vaults are probably the most consistent. Again, it's interesting. I spoke about it in a previous episode with Harry Hepworth doing the 2 vaults from the forward entry, and me finding that a bit confusing that he's able to do those 2 vaults from the same forward entry. This is one of the first people that I've seen do a Yurchenko double pike and then a Suk double pike. For me, it's such a similar vault. I don't know why the technical committee and the judging community, when they make those new rules for this cycle, they've encouraged the gymnasts to do 2 of the very similar vaults from a same direction and same family. Like, it's like doing the 2 same vaults for me. So those gymnasts are going to have issues in the next cycle because I imagine they'll switch that around. So they're going to have to go back for doing 1 forwards and 1 backwards instead of doing 2 backwards. So it'll be interesting to see how that translates into the next cycle. But yeah, here's Yurchenko double pike and Suk double pike are very consistent, which is really impressive because those 2 vaults in particular, when you're landing backwards and it's a blind landing, especially when you're piking in and when you're in the air doing a double pike, we had Christian Thomas on the podcast talk about learning the Yurchenko double pike. You're almost holding on for dear life and you're fighting with gravity and you're pulling your legs. And when your legs are straight, it's really hard to open out and bend them at just the right time. If your legs are already bent in a tuck position, you're going straight into a landing position because you land with bent legs. But if you've got to go from pike, doing a pikeward back somersault with straight legs and then land in a tuck, that's really hard. You've got to do a lot in a short space of time. So you will see a lot of the gymnasts fall back and roll back on that second vault. A lot of them tend to do that as their second vault if they're doing a forwards vault first, because the forwards one is more consistent. They get a good score in the bag, and then the risky one is landing backwards. But he seems very consistent with that vault. I can't really see him making a big mistake. And then you've got Sheck from Hong Kong. I've known him since we did a World Cup in Tokyo in 2011, right? And he was like the man about Tokyo and took us on a wild goose chase to this bar. Me and my teammates that were there, Christian, Max, we always talk about that. We had a right laugh. He was trying to teach us how to play a drinking game in Cantonese, and it made no sense to us. And then he just kind of left us in the middle of Tokyo, and we had to find our way back, and he just walked off. It was about a 45-minute walk. So that was the first time I met him. Real nice guy, and I'm amazed he's still competing at this level and doing some of the biggest vaults in the world. It looks like they're quite consistent. He's doing the full in back out, which is, for me, it's just an absolute death wish. That's like the craziest vault ever. So fair play to anybody that's going to do that vault. And his Dragulescu looks really solid as well. Looks quite consistent. And again, like I said, can't see anyone really taking that spot off him. You've got James from Australia, who is improving, doing pretty well. Really impressed with his vaults in Cottbus, but I just think he's probably left it a bit too late to beat one of those two. But you never know. Vault is probably, out of all of those apparatus, next to high bar, probably the highest risk, I would say. So anything could happen, and somebody that's in that third or fourth spot could come in. If one of those top two guys has a really bad competition, doesn't qualify for the final, and one of those guys takes 30 points, you know, it is all up for grabs. So that's very exciting for the spectator. Parallel bars. Parallel bars is quite interesting. Top two guys are both Colombian. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You can't have two people from the same country take the two spots. So it can only be one of those Colombians. And Angel Barajas, I'm not sure how you say his name. I'm sure I've butchered that. He's the junior that was kind of making waves at the Junior Worlds very recently, doing the most incredibly difficult gymnastics for juniors. There's a lot of Colombians at the moment that are doing gymnastics that is out of this world. I know everybody's thinking, I wonder what's in the water in Colombia, because those guys are literally pushing the boundaries of the sport in terms of the difficulty. On parallel bars, he's on 71 points. And his teammate, Joselmir Calvo, is on 68 points. He's been around for a long time. He's someone of my generation. He's got to be into his 30s. I think he's got a kid, maybe two kids now. Still going, still doing a good routine. One thing I would say about the two Colombians is, you know, for me personally, aesthetically, their technique on the parallel bars isn't my favorite. And I actually really like, again, I'm going to give it a good go at his name, the Uzbekistani gymnast, Abdur Akimov, who's on 66 points. So he's quite close with them, and his technique on parallel bars is absolutely beautiful. His line is incredible. He reminds me very much of a cross between a gymnast called Yenar Yerumbetov from Kazakhstan in the early 2000s, and his an old teammate that, again, comes back to that maybe he trained with him or has the same coach from Uzbekistan that won an Olympic medal in Beijing, Anton Fokin, who did an incredible routine. I think he won a silver medal in Beijing on parallel bars. His gymnastics reminded me of his, but his line is just absolutely beautiful. It's like textbook gymnastics. He's not far behind, so he's only 2 points behind Calvo, and he's only 5 points behind Barajas, who's in the lead. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. I think that's probably the tightest event. The Colombian that's in front, so Angel, he does have an opportunity to take a spot on high bar, although he's very far behind at the moment. So when we move to high bar, like I said, the guy from Taiwan, I think it's Taiwan or Taipei. So Taiwan or Taipei, Tang, 76 points, has took that first spot. The next two guys, you've got Robert Tvorogal. He's from Lithuania, and I actually remember him because he was in the final on high bar with me at the Junior Europeans in 2010, which is now 14 years ago. So at the time, I think we were the same age. He must have been 17. I think he took the bronze medal on high bar. Remember him being very good on high bar. Sergei's good friends with his coach. His routine is very, very consistent. And at the moment, he is about 20 points ahead. In fact, he's even more. He's between 20 and 30 points ahead of third place. I can't see him messing up his high bar routine, so I think he's taking that next spot. One of the most exciting things for me was the guy that's in the #1 spot on parallel bars, Barajas. His high bar routine is unbelievable. He did a 6.8 difficulty. He's doing Cassina, connecting Kovac to Coleman. He does all his in-bar, and then at the end of his in-bar, he's doing squat half into a Stauda Kachev connected to a Kachev. And when I watched his routine, I think it was from Baku, you could see all the coaches and gymnasts just applaud him because they were amazed he was able to do that connection right at the end of his routine. Now, somebody will be able to tell me as well. I'm not sure whether he did a triple-double straight off high bar. So I want to see his bar routine at the Olympic Games. If you're Team Colombia, your perfect dream scenario is that Barajas takes the gold spot, takes the silver spot on high bar in the World Cup circuit, qualifies a spot there, and Calvo takes the spot on parallel bars, and they've got two gymnasts. I can't see that happening, and I think personally, selfishly and individually, Barajas' best chance is obviously he's going to want individually to take that parallel bar spot, and then when he gets to the Olympics, all of these individual guys that get those spots, they can compete in the all-around if they want to. So that's another thing that he can think about. But amazing to see some of these young guys that are coming onto the scene using this World Cup circuit as experience. But, you know, I think in the end, in hindsight, after the Olympic Games, it might turn out to be a situation where the competition and the intensity and the quality of the competition they had in those World Cup circuits set them up for the Olympic Games, and they go on to have quite a lot of success. And it will help them with their transition from junior to senior. I think for some of the big teams that are sending their young gymnasts to that World Cup, you know, it's been the case in recent years where you could send gymnasts to World Cups and the level wasn't that high. That's completely changed with this Olympic qualification situation. So you go to a World Cup now and you make a top 8, and that is a legit achievement. And I think that's probably going to factor into if you're somebody, let's say, on the British team that has to hit a certain amount of targets and go to a World Cup, win a World Cup medal and make a World Cup final, and that qualifies you for funding in the future. It's going to be way more legitimate now because of the quality of the competition. 2018, I went to Paris, competed in Paris-Bercy at the World Cup, managed to finish 5th in the high bar final, and going off the funding criteria, that should have technically qualified me for D-level funding. But unfortunately, that didn't seem to come into play when it came down to my selection, whereas now I think the quality of those finals is so high that it will be factored in a lot more, which is great to see. It's really cool. But yeah, that World Cup, I think I was mainly just impressed with the quality. I think the youth as well, again, those young guys coming up, super impressed with those, especially the guy from Colombia, the French gymnast, and lots of gymnasts from different nations. There's a lot of nations now, you know, countries like Egypt, Uzbekistan, Colombia. The quality of the gymnastics in the men's side of the sport, the depth is just unreal. You can go down to the 20th best team in the world and they'll have some absolute monsters on some of the apparatus. And that's a really cool thing about men's gymnastics, and maybe something that we don't celebrate enough. You know, you have countries from all over the world that can produce some of the best gymnasts in the world, which is amazing. It's great for the sport. I don't think there's many sports like that. And then I guess the spread, yeah, the spread across all of the countries, and what that's going to translate to is that potentially you're going to have lots of different nations fighting and picking up medals at the Olympic Games, which is great. That's really cool to see. And again, when you've got countries like Colombia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan winning medals, all that does is increase the level of the sport across the whole spectrum. And it pushes those guys on the best Olympic teams, you know, the teams that win the medals all the time, it pushes them. And it's going to be very hard for the best guys in the world just to qualify for those apparatus finals at the Olympics. So I'm expecting to potentially see maybe some of the best Olympic finals we've ever seen in men's gymnastics. So that's the World Cup circuit. Again, thanks to Reece. I wish him all the best in Doha. I know that he's not going for one of those spots. He's already got his, but it'll be, for him, I think it's going to be a real test to see where he stacks up against some of those best guys that will be going up against him, hopefully at the Olympic Games. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed watching some gymnastics again in between feeding Aussie, and it's got me, yeah, it's given me the bug a little bit to really follow the gymnastics over the next few months. Next thing we're going to talk about is the British champs. So I had the opportunity to go down and watch. Too busy, but the great thing was I could watch it on the live stream. So I obviously watched the guys from Notts because I work with them 1 day a week, and it was really cool to see how they did. Big shout out to Sir Kane, who became the under-16 British champion. He did really, really well after the English, so really cool to see that and see some of the older guys putting some great performances. So that was great. You know, for me personally, watching those guys and see how hard they've worked, it was great to see those results. And yeah, a shout out to Josh for all the amazing work he's done, particularly the last 18 months since Sergey left the gym. I think he's done a brilliant job to kind of stabilise everything, get a great system in place, and those guys seem to be loving their training and really enjoying the sport, so that's awesome to see. When we come to the British guys, Joe Fraser did it, man. English champion and then pulled it off again, British champion 2 weeks later. You know, we had him on the podcast last year. I left feeling very confident that he was going to put in some good performances at the start of this year. He was going to do everything possible. He had the experience to pull it off. It's a big comeback, having 2 surgeries. So amazing job from Joe. And he looked very, very good. I think by the time the Olympic Games comes around, he's going to be up there with the best all-arounders in the world. He's definitely going to be pushing for a top 10. Next step after that is maybe top 6, top 5. He's definitely up there. Very well-rounded. He's even increased his difficulty on floor. He's put in the triple-double, so shout out to Joe. I know that floor isn't maybe naturally the event where he's naturally the most gifted, but to put in a triple-double and be doing a big routine, 6-0 start, I think, off the top of my head, and it's been quite consistent. A round of applause to him for that. Amazing achievement. Pommel horse looks unbelievable. To have Max go up and then potentially Joe hit a mid-14 on pommel, that's going to really get back to what we talked about in that podcast when we did the men's team prediction. We're pommel workers, right? And we kind of lost that maybe a little bit in the last few years, been a bit inconsistent. I think to have that score of a mid-14 go up from Joe is going to be huge. And there's no reason why he can't push towards 15. You know, he's had pommel horse finals in the past. Rings, he looks strong. Vault is, if he's going to have a weakness, it will probably be vault, but it's only his technique on vault is weaker than some of his other apparatus, and he'd probably admit that himself, but he's got a good solid 2.5. I don't think he needs anything more. I'm sure in the next 3 months before the Olympic Games, he's going to maybe push for that triple twist. He was working the double front and the Dragolescu. I think it's maybe going to be ankle dependent, foot dependent, and maybe that's why he's just doing the 2.5. But I don't think he needs any more. He's proved it. You know, he's English and British champion, so it'd be very difficult now for him not to be selected. He's going to be the top all-arounder that we have going to the next major championships at the Euros and then the Olympic Games. And then parallel bars, again, from what I understand, he's had a bit of an injury, so did really well to put a routine together, get fit, do a good routine. That's only going to improve. He is the former parallel bars world champion, and then on high bar, just awesome routine. Super strong, very cool under pressure. So yeah, shout out to Joe, amazing performance. Yeah, and it was great to see him do that. And great to see someone, you know, that year out from the Olympics to have 2 surgeries and have to pull off a massive comeback and to actually do it. There's not many athletes that can do that, so credit to Joe for that. Jake, I think Jake's improved his consistency certainly this year. At the start of the year, improved from the English to the British, wasn't far behind Joe at the British in terms of the all-around. I think his difficulty on floor and the routine he's trying to do is definitely got more consistent. Pommel horse looks great, rings nice and solid, vault is amazing. I think he sat his vault down, he's 3.5 on the first day, but that vault, I mean, you know, in that situation, when you know you've got to do it 2 days in a row, it's going to be hard. It's always going to be hard for him. It's like the hardest vault in the world, right? Parallel bars looks great. I think he won parallel bars on the first day. And high bar looks solid. I'd be really interested with Jake, whether over the next 3 months he's going to really push to put that Cassina in, whether that Cassina is something that would go in for a team event or whether he'd just use it individually in the all-around. Again, I think Jake's going to be up there. You know, with his difficulty on floor and vault, the improvements he's made on pommel, his solid score on high bar and his solid score on rings, I think he'll be up there top 10. So him and Joe, they're really going to be fighting up in and amongst the best gymnasts in the world, which is awesome. Next gymnast was Max. For me, Max has done his job, right? We talked about in that podcast, he had potentially 3 routines. He had the English, the British, and then the Masters final if he made it. I said he probably needs to hit 2. He hit all 3. He looks consistent, confident, solid. I'd be interested to know, like about a year ago, Max seemed to be in quite a lot on social media, on YouTube, filming and recording a lot of his training, was very active. The British champs didn't quite go to plan. He pulled out of the Europeans, you know, very uncharacteristic performance in the Masters final at the British last year from Max. You know, one of the rare occasions in his career he had multiple falls on the pommel. It seems this year he's just adopted a fully focused kind of attitude and mindset. There's not as much on social media. To me, on the outside, it seems like maybe someone is running his social media, which is probably a super smart thing for him to do. He's going to have loads of pressure on his shoulders this year, going into a games with, you know, he's one of the faces of the sport. He's going to have a lot of sponsors. So just focusing on the gymnastics, if he has done that, which I think he has, because given his performances, there's no way you perform like that. Hit those routines, hardest routine in the world, 3 times in a row, back to back, without putting in a great winter block of training. So for me, Max is going. There's no way you can't send him. So I think he's done his job. So credit to Max for that. I mean, he's doing that into his 30s, which is unbelievable. Going to his 4th Olympic Games, he's certainly going to be in with a shout of winning another Olympic gold medal. I think if Max goes there, regardless of what Max does, for me, one of the most, not only the most successful British gymnasts of all time, probably one of the most successful British Olympians of all time. I'd expect that, you know, that New Year's honours list in January 2025 is probably going to come calling. There's definitely no doubt if he becomes a triple pommel horse Olympic champion, first gymnast to ever do that, that will certainly be in the back of his mind. So that's Max. Courtney, I got to say, like, I was incredibly impressed. Courtney came third all around at the British Championships. I mean, I don't think anyone would have predicted or called that. Personally, for me, it was amazing to see. You know, we had Niall recently on the episode, and Niall saying, he said, you know, I'd love Courtney to get that spot. I think he's deserved it, and I think he's right. You know, reserve at the last 2 Olympic Games. He's done absolutely everything he possibly could to go out and get 6 pieces ready, to do high bar, which he, you know, he's not his favourite event. He's a bit scared of the high bar. To have done a high bar routine, to have scored 80 plus, beat some of the good all-rounders that we have, who underperformed at the British, and to have taken that bronze medal, I mean, he probably surprised himself, but to have taken a bronze medal in the all-round in an Olympic year, that is a massive achievement. So regardless of what happens this summer, I think in years to come, Courtney's going to look back and be super proud of that. Like, I know for me, when I retired and I look back at the Europeans in 2015, you know, at the time, I was still hoping my career would go on for a few more years and I'd have the chance to compete at a high level a few more times in all-around events. But the 6th place I got at the Europeans all-around, I'm so proud of that achievement, massive achievement. Top 6 in the whole of Europe all-around is huge. So, yeah, I think Courtney will be very proud of that. Looks solid on rings. Harry seems to be consistently beating him, and I think all that comes down to is just the construction and just how clean Harry's positions are. There's like nothing to take off. Very smart construction of his routine. He's losing hardly anything in execution deductions. So for me, yeah, all that comes down to is Courtney's pushing that difficulty because of his personal aspirations on the rings, and the routine construction for me is just not quite as efficient as Harry's is, and he's starting to beat him consistently on rings. But Courtney's not far behind, and I think potentially having a team where you'd have Harry, Courtney, and Joe perform on rings is a very strong rings team. So that's awesome, and that's an area we've been very weak in the past. So definitely would be our strongest rings team ever if those 3 were going up. Vault again, still doing his 2 vaults, parallel bars, good routine. Took medals on floor, I think, took medals on P bars. So he's showing that on that qualification event, when you have to put 4 scores up, you don't have to, you could put 3, but that's a big risk. He can go up and do a routine. He can even do a high bar routine if we need him to. So shout out to Courtney for doing absolutely everything possible to make sure that after that decision for the Olympic Games, he will know he's done everything. And it was not in his control, it was in other people's control and the selectors' control, whether they picked him for the team or not. So yeah, Courtney has done himself a real service there at the British, and I think he's going to make it very tight between himself and potentially James for that last spot, in my opinion. So yeah, shout out to Courtney, legend. And he's just announced that he's going to become a dad in September, so he's going to have that new dad energy, which I'm telling you is a real thing. That motivation, I can't imagine how inspiring that is when you become a dad, or you're going to become a dad and you're still competing. That must just give you next level fire in your belly. So yeah, I'm expecting that Courtney is going to push over the next few months, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised if he takes that spot for the Olympic Games. Harry, again, this guy, for someone so young, such a wise head on his shoulders, and whoever is advising him, or whether it's coming from himself, you know, I've never really seen anything like it. He's gone to the British and he's gone to the English, and he's only performed on a certain amount of apparatus. He's done so well in this World Cup circuit where he's been that he's taken a gold medal on floor, he's taken a bronze medal on vault, and he's gone and won the gold medal on rings at the British. And he's so confident in himself, his performances, that he's saying, right, I don't need to compete on floor here at the British. I'm just going to do rings. I don't need to compete on vault here at this World Cup. I'm just doing floor, and it's paid off. It's worked out, because now you cannot not take him. He is a real medal shout at this Olympic Games, not just on one apparatus, but 3. He is the British Ablazin. Denis Ablazin, the Russian gymnast who was so successful on 3 apparatus for a long period of time. He's Denis Ablazin level 2, and his execution is probably even better. So incredible what he's doing. I like the switch up in his floor routine from the Cottbus World Cup. I like the double straight. I have to watch it back again. I'm sure he did 8 tumbles in his routine, which is mental. And I've got to say, on floor, seeing these guys do 3.5 twists and double on the side, I just can't get my head around that. You know, that would have been the first tumble for me, and I'd need to run like Usain Bolt just to get enough power for my ankles to be able to handle that. So just, yeah, incredible routines, incredible difficulty, but the difficulty is consistent. So for me, he's going without a shadow of a doubt. He's cemented that with his performances, and it's just the mindset and the strategic, tactical play from either him and his coaching team to decide that I don't need to go and risk having a mistake on an apparatus here. I've shown what I can do. I've won those gold medals. I'm just going to perform on this 1 or 2 apparatus and do really well on them. So yeah, amazing. Really cool. Never seen anything like that. Reminds me maybe a little bit in the mindset of Fred when we had that conversation with him. Just real smart head on his shoulders, incredibly confident, and he backs it up with the performances as well. And then the last person I'm going to talk about, because for me, these guys are the 6 guys that are in contention, is James. You know, I think James seems to have struggled a little bit. He's not miles off. He's there or thereabouts. English came second. British, he seemed to struggle a little bit. You know, he came out, he put a post on social media, just said he's been finding it really hard, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on, just very fatigued all the time. I think he did better on the second day. He really pushed himself. He didn't perform on vault. You know, it's going to be, if it comes down to the fact that he didn't do 6 pieces on the first day at the British, I think it's going to be very tough for him to take. He's managed to hold on for these 7 years. He's been the guy on the team. His performance he pulled out the bag at the World Championships last year was amazing. Top 10 finish. Whoever misses out on that team out of those 6, it's going to be massively disappointing. But I think after those 6, the depth drops off. And that was my big takeaway. My big takeaway from the British was the lack of depth in the squad. And for me, when I look back at 2016, and as you know, I competed in 2012 and I won a medal with the team, but the team for 2016 was even better and probably was a lot stronger, but their competition was even stronger that time. But if I look at the guys that weren't on the team, you've got myself as a reserve, Dan Purvis as a reserve, Courtney Tulloch as a reserve, James Hall didn't make the team, Dan Keatings didn't make the team, Ashley Watson didn't make the team, Frank Baines didn't make the team, like the list goes on. That you could have sent another 7 or 8 guys that could have easily been on that team. The depth was just unbelievable. So for me, like looking at it now, those top 6 guys, yes, they've done incredibly well. They're a very strong team, but the depth concerns me a bit for the future. I know we've got a lot of great youngsters coming up, but a lot of those guys that are between the age of, let's say, 19, 22, 23, they haven't translated their performances maybe as juniors into that senior success yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I think there will be quite a few gymnasts retiring at the end of this cycle or slowing down. You know, you've got Max in his 30s, Courtney and James are getting close to their 30s. Joe is mid-20s, so he's probably going to hang around for a bit longer. But so those guys might be retiring. That creates a hole for the next guys. But yeah, that depth is a little concerning for me. I know there's been some big injuries, but yeah, I worry about that depth. Shout out to Johnny. Johnny ended up breaking his foot just before the competitions at the English. Very upsetting to see. Super sad because, you know, I think he would have given it a real good shot. So that certainly has made a difference. I think if Johnny's in there, he's certainly competitive with those top guys. So yeah, the depth is a worry for me, and I think that's at contrast probably with the American team. And I wonder whether the strategy for the British team for me over the last few years has been more... It almost reminds me of what Dave Eaton told us in a recent podcast about how in the 90s they focused the money on a certain amount of gymnasts, just the top 5 guys, and that money never filtered down to the younger generation. They seem to have done that. The squads are getting smaller, so you've only got maybe a maximum of 12 guys on the men's team, where in the past you might have 16, upwards of 16 plus. There seems to be less training camps for the junior team, so they might only have 4 or 5 training camps. So it seems like the resources are being used by a smaller amount of gymnasts, and I'm not sure whether long-term that's the best strategy. So it's going to be interesting to see how that translates. I think we're still going to go and have a lot of success at this Olympic Games. We might even find that we have more opportunities to win individual medals on apparatus than we ever have before. I think you're looking at Max on pommel. I think Harry really could floor, vault, potentially rings. I think you've got Jake on floor, Jake on vault. Joe, you've got parallel bars all around. super. If Courtney's there, rings, vault, like there's a lot of potential apparatus finals and then medals. I think British Gymnastics needs it. I think they're under a lot of pressure. You know, I'm hearing that potentially they're under financial pressure as well. So they're going to need medals to keep that funding coming in. They'll know that, and that might be a big factor in the team that they select, and it might play into Courtney's hands if they're going to go for maximising medals. And then if as a byproduct the team does really well, then great. But I think they're going to potentially, from the way that they've played this cycle, I think they're going to push for individual medals. That's my prediction. And that's, yeah, I guess just my opinion on the way I've seen things play out in the last few years. But it's going to be super exciting. And the top 6 will be those 6. So whoever misses out, they're going to be that reserve. And you never know. Anything can happen, right? Going into an Olympic Games, there's a lot of pressure. It's very tense. There could be an injury, and so someone's got to be ready. But now, whoever that last spot is, it looks like they're going to be able to do all round, right? So that's going to be really cool. And I guess the next thing I'm going to talk about, and this is going to be a bit shorter because I haven't done as much research, and we had Neutral Deductions reach out, who is a men's gymnastics show. They love the podcast. They wanted to talk to us a little bit about the American system and explain the rules and the bonus structure that Fred recently told us about that I was fascinated with. So we're probably going to do something around the men's selection for the Olympic Games for USA when that happens towards the summer, and we might get them again to maybe share some of their knowledge with us about the American system and their prediction of what might happen. The Americans are great at televising that event, so it'd be great to watch it. I think it's normally 2 events that they have that go on in the summer, so we'll be able to watch the American Olympic trials, maybe do a prediction episode before that. So that's going to be really, really cool, and maybe have a guest come on and do that with us. But the Americans, yeah, have been doing very well. Contrast to the British, I think their focus is going to be on team. They have 3 very strong all-rounders that are putting out big performances. So Yul Moldauer, I'm impressed that he's been competing a lot. So he's been out in France doing league matches. Obviously goes out there and earns money. But I think he's partly been doing that for experience and to compete internationally in Europe. You know, Fred talked about the difference between the college system and the international competition, and it just being at a different level. One thing I have to say about Yul is he's getting better and better with age. You know, a few years ago, when he first came onto the senior team for the Americans, there was certain technique things that aesthetically I didn't like, and they were quite old-fashioned techniques, particularly on high bar. He tended to struggle, maybe pommels a little bit, but he's just got better and better and better. And I think the quality of his work, he's just maturing like a fine wine. It's just beautiful to watch his gymnastics. There's very interesting gymnastics, you know, very different gymnastics on most of the apparatus, still improving, still pushing to put Cassina in on high bar, you know, for an event that's not natural for someone. Like, credit to him for that. And I think he's going to be, again, very similar to maybe Joe and Jake, around that 84, 85. Maybe on an amazing day they could push close to 86, but he's there in and amongst it. So yeah, super impressed with his gymnastics. It's beautiful aesthetically. His pommel horse routine, I love it. I love the flare full spindle he's added on the 2 handles. Great, unique skill. Rings, I love his straight Homer on rings, swing to handstand. I think that's awesome. P-bars is just an amazing routine, very different to anybody else. And high bar, yeah, I like the fact that he's pushing it and pushing himself. So yeah, super beautiful, clean gymnastics. And, you know, he's been, you know, in and amongst it on floor before in the past, so a great floor worker. So yeah, him. Then Shane Wiskus had injuries, I think, the last couple of years. Looked very strong at the Winter Cup, not far behind Yul. Very consistent, big gymnastics. One of those gymnasts that's training out of that Evo gym. A big, massive businessman in America has put a hell of a lot of money into men's gymnastics, which is really cool. He's paying these athletes to go and train at his gym. He's paying them tens of thousands of pounds. From what I understand, that system is maybe not going to last past this Olympic Games, but Shane is a product of that. They have Sam McCulloch out there training and coaching that team, and it seems to be doing really well. Those guys are doing very well, so really interesting system. And that typically in America, after the guys finish college, they don't really have a place to go, so I think most of those guys are going to that gym. They had their national center that closed down recently, and this has kind of taken the place of that, but I'm hearing that that's potentially closing down, and that system's going to break down after the Olympic Games. But the depth in the American team is huge. And then obviously Fred, you know, I saw his high bar routine from the past weekend in his NCAA competition. Just amazing. The quality, again, his confidence. You know, we did a video of the Lukin journey. If you've not watched that video on YouTube, you can go and watch it. It's a series of me trying to learn the Lukin skill, my favorite skill on high bar. He does it so effortlessly, and there's literally no deductions. He does it so well, I think he could connect it. And he has a real variety of high bar skills. So he's got Kasina, Lukin, Kachev connections. I like that he's added in the Quast to one-arm giant. I've been waiting for gymnasts, particularly on the international scene, to start doing that, because a Quast is a good skill. It's a C skill, but you can often get an angle deduction, but you're doing that one-arm giant, there's no deductions. So I've been waiting for people to make the connection in their brain from doing the one-arm giant, which is a B, the Quast that is a C, just add them together and you don't take any deductions on that. So technically, great to see him doing that. I think loads of people will copy him very soon. And yeah, he's been doing very good in the NCAA season, hitting massive high scores. So yeah, they've got 3 super strong all-rounders, which is going to be huge for their team efforts. It looks like, to me, they're going to prioritise the team medal. They've, recently just won the World Championship team medal. I think they're going to go for that Olympic medal. They've been getting closer and closer. I think it's going to be very hard for GB to beat them. Very solid team, very united, work together really well. Great system. They're obviously using incredibly good tactics and strategy. We talked about the bonus system that they have in place, and the fact that they just go off numbers, very much like the Moneyball type approach, but to gymnastics. So super impressed with that. The guy leading their team was a former team Olympic medalist from 2004, Brett McClure. So he's had that experience. He's going to be there at the Olympic Games, so they can feed off that. And I'm expecting big things from them. Those 2 second spots, you've got Brody Malone, world champion on high bar, had a horrific injury to his knee. I'm not sure whether he's going to get back in time. Maybe he is. He is competing. Doesn't seem to be doing floor and vault yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does. He was on the team at the Olympic Games in Tokyo, did very well, top 10 all round. So it's hard to, a previous Olympian is always going to be there in and amongst it because they have that experience, and you don't get to the Olympics by not being very good at gymnastics. So he's going to be in and amongst the mix. It's just whether that injury is going to be a factor. You've then got a guy called Curran Phillips who does probably one of the most beautiful routines now on any apparatus. And I think if the Chinese gymnast Zhu probably does the most perfect routine of any gymnast, in my opinion, men or women, in the sport on parallel bars. And sometimes when the judges take deductions, I genuinely think they're just making them up because they think, well, I can't give him a 10. There's no way I can give him a 10, so I'm going to have to deduct something. So what can I potentially deduct? Because I think they're taking deductions for things like angles, or maybe not for height, for example, where if it was another gymnast that had loads of deductions, they wouldn't take that deduction for that part of the skill because there were so many. But because he has no deductions, they're just finding things to deduct. So he does the most perfect routine, but this American is getting very close. There's hardly any deductions in his routine. I like that he does all the upper arm skills. I'm sure that could potentially become very repetitive and they might change the rules. But, you had a gymnast back in the mid-2000s called Tsokolidis from Greece who did a very similar routine. He's doing this routine. It's incredibly clean. I didn't know much about him. He's quite new onto the scene, so I kind of looked for some other apparatus. He's very good on high bar. Great high bar swinger. Solid Yurchenko 2.5 on vault, which is a very clean vault. Not sure what he does on floor, pommel and ring. So if anybody out there knows, please send me a message. I'd love to know that, particularly when we start to look at the American team more closely and their selection. But super excited with him. I'm expecting him to be on the team. And I think that last spot, they're going to look at potentially a pommel horse worker. And whether it's a pommel horse worker that goes as a specialist. So they have Stefan who does that, world champion on pommel, won lots of medals, very consistent, has been doing well at the start of this year and early on in the season, or whether they go for someone that is more of an all-arounder but has a good pommel. We'll see. I haven't watched the guys that are underneath those top 3 closely enough to really make a prediction on what the team will be yet, but they are very strong, and they've just won the team competition at the international comp in Germany at the DTB, and they look very good. And I think their junior team won. So from what Fred said to us, they have a lot of strength and depth in the juniors, not just the seniors. So I'm expecting them to be strong for a very long time. And look, they might be able to challenge the Chinese and the Japanese at the Olympic Games. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode, guys. I know it's been a lot of gymnastics-y type stuff. I've really enjoyed it, to be honest. It's given me a break from everything else that I'm doing, and I could really analyze and focus on the gymnastics. I'd like to know what you think. Please leave us some feedback. We've not said it for a while, but if you could review the podcast, if you've been enjoying the content, if you could leave us some feedback, that really does make a difference. And we do take that into consideration. We've started on the guest podcast doing an intro. From the next guest podcast, we're going to start doing a little recap of the key things that have come out of that podcast, the key messages I've taken away, to do almost a little bit of a roundup. So we do take that on board. So definitely share that feedback. YouTube's a great place to do that too. We are hoping to still get into the YouTube space. And my plan is to get back into the gymnastics gym and do a bit of training myself. I'm missing it. I'd really like to see if I can get back in, similar to the Lukin journey, and try some other skills. That's exciting me at the minute. And maybe train with some friends, maybe train a bit with Frank, train a bit with Niall, and do that. There seems to be one thing that's quite exciting is that a lot of the ex-retired gymnasts like me that used to vlog back in the day seem to be getting back. They're going back to their roots and the traditional gymnastic stuff. I've seen Niall doing it. Ashley's doing a really cool thing where he's trying to complete every skill in the whole of gymnastics. He says it's a long-term project over the next few years. That's been cool. So yeah, I'm hoping to do that at some point and bring you some visual content on YouTube. But yeah, if you could like, subscribe, follow us. And yeah, thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the sponsors that help us, you know, keep providing you guys with the content, getting the guests in, make this happen. And yeah, thank you for everything, and I will see you in the next episode.